Okay, here's our video today. Carbon, energy, and the four types of life. And when I'm talking about the four types of life, I'm talking about how those four types of life obtain carbon and how they obtain energy. Because obviously you can categorize life in many different ways. So as we stare into this ocean, this very calm blue ocean, it looks like let's get our pen ready. Looks like there's a nice little island out there in the distance. Maybe we can put a little boat. There's a little boat. We're sailing the science seas. And here is the sun, right? This is the sun. This is the source of all life, the sun. So we need that, and we'll talk about that. So every organism on Earth, every living thing is a carbon-based life form, or all carbon-based. And as far as we know in the universe, everything, if we ever find life out there, we haven't found it yet, but would probably be carbon-based. So let's write that down. All living things are carbon-based. Carbon-based. We all need carbon. We all need energy to live, right? And the earth and everything on earth, every living thing needs the sun. So we're carbon-based life forms. Carbon is found in all living things. So why carbon? That's a little question. Why carbon? So let's get a model of carbon. Get a little model, a Bohr model of carbon from Niels Bohr. Right, and here is a Bohr model, and they say a Bohr model from Niels Bohr, like I said before. It's just for teaching purposes. As you can see, these two rings over here, and let's make sure we have our pen ready. We have our K ring or K shell or K cloud, or however you want to talk about it. Notice in the K ring, it has two electrons. Electrons have a negative charge, and inside the nucleus, we'll have a positive charge for protons, and then we have neutrons who have no charge. So you notice that in the outermost shell or cloud of carbon, it has four, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. It has four electrons. So carbon can hold four more. And I'm not going to make this a chemistry lesson here, but that is why carbon is special, because it could bond with four other elements. If you think about some of the things that make us, protein, for example, we need protein to build muscle, to grow. We need protein. It's made of carbon, it's made of hydrogen, it's made of oxygen. Also has some sulfur and nitrogen. If you think about lipids or fats, right, they're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. If you think of carbs, carbohydrates, we need for fuel, guess what they're made of? You got it. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and DNA. DNA that are blueprints for us, right? Deoxyribonucleic acid. Guess what it's made of? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Also has phosphorus and also has nitrogen. So if you can see the pattern, carbon everywhere. We need it. We also need hydrogen. We also need oxygen. And of course, we need sulfur and nitrogen and phosphorus. So you can say we're carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen life forms also, right? But it's carbon that makes these stable bonds. That's why we call ourselves carbon-based life forms. So let me write that down over here also. Carbon can easily bond with other atoms, with other elements. Let's see if we can fit it in. There we go. And itself. And not only can it easily bond with them, it can make stable bonds. So that's why carbon is important. So, and every organism on Earth is going to obtain carbon and obtain energy. And we're going to break it down that way. First, we're going to break it down into two ways. So let's get a clean page. Here's our clean page. Okay, so write organisms over here. If we have our pen ready, let's use yellow. Let's have it stick out. Organisms. So an organism is either going to feed itself, like plants. They just sit in the sun, have a good time, or they feed on others, feed on others like we do. Sounds kind of gross, right? But we feed on other organisms. We feed on animals, we feed on plants. So we'll put animals over here. Just for now, we'll just put these two. So if you're feeding on yourself, remember, plants don't go to McDonald's. They don't go to Arby's, or they don't get a steak. They don't even eat other plants. So if that's happening, they call them autotrophs. Special word here. Because auto means self and troph means nourishment. But if you're feeding on others, we call it heterotroph. Again, troph means nourishment, but hetero means different. So right now we can break down organisms two ways. You're either an autotroph or you're a heterotroph. And of course there has been questions about, well, what about the Venus flytrap? What about this Venus flytrap? Well, the Venus flytrap will be called a mixotroph. So technically we have three. So yes, the Venus flytrap does use photosynthesis, but it doesn't get enough nutrients, so it also could feed on animals that get trapped into its jaws. So it's doing both. So we have the autotrophs, heterotrophs, and the mixotrophs. Now from these two, for example, we'll keep the mixotrophs out for a while. From these two, we can break it down even further. But there's another key. So let's put a little line here. And let's start with the plants with photosynthesis. So how plants get their food. So I'm going to write a little formula here. And I'm going to write it small so I can fit it in. Don't worry so much about the formula. So here we have carbon dioxide. You need 6 carbon dioxide molecules, compounds, plus you need 6 water molecules. And that will yield, there's the yield sign. In other words, it will bring forth glucose. I'll just write glucose. Plus, it would also yield water, O2. So you know this, right? Plants will breathe in carbon dioxide and they will release oxygen, while we breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. But let's now, with these ingredients you have here, you need a catalyst. You need something to jumpstart this. Just think of when we're cooking food, for example. We have our little saucepan here. Let's say we're cooking food, and we have ingredients. We have ingredient A, we have ingredient B. Who knows what it is? We're cooking something. What's missing? Right? We need heat. We need an energy source. So for plants, they need sunlight. They need sunlight. Especially what's coming from that sunlight are photons. There's a symbol called, looks like a Y, but it's Greek letter gamma, if you're wondering. So that sunlight is like the oven. It's like the energy we're getting from the oven to jumpstart this. It's a catalyst, and it will bring forth glucose and photons. And glucose, we need glucose too. Glucose, every living thing needs glucose. It's the sugar that will produce this fuel. So with autotrophs, you can get that catalyst through light, but you can also get it through chemicals. So now we have to make another chart. We're going to take the autotrophs and the heterotrophs and break them down into more categories. Okay, and go back if you need to. Photo, by the way, means light. Photosynthesis means light. Synthesis, by the way, means coming together. So I'm going to clear this out. We're going to make now 4 categories. Clear it out there. Okay. And so again, we're going to have our autotrophs. And you can have 2 types of autotrophs. So you can have what they call photo autotrophs. I mean, they're using light as their energy source. Photoautotrophs are plants, right? They're using light. They're using photons to get their energy. Now the other type of, we'll put a little line here, the other type, they won't use light, but they use chemical reactions. They call them chemoautotrophs. So chemoautotrophs are, for example, these organisms you'll see in these deep in the ocean, these deep sea vent creatures, deep sea vents. Deep down in the ocean, they're bacteria. Right, and so they're making their own food, they're an autotroph, but they're not using light. So again, I'm going to just write over here photons, we'll just write light, make sure we know it's light. Do a little sun. Deep down in the ocean, these chemoautotrophs don't have that light. So they're using chemical reactions, they're using other molecules, which we'll talk about. So I'll put a line over here. And then on this side, we have a heterotrophs. And we can break down the heterotrophs into photoheterotrophs. Now again, heterotrophs, they consume other organisms, but they're not using chemical reactions in their metabolism. Whereas we would be chemoheterotrophs. So we use chemical reactions in our body to break down our food. For example, in our food, when we eat food, the food will be turned into glucose. And I'm oversimplifying it here. And that glucose will enter our cells and eventually our mitochondria. And from that glucose, we're going to create ATP, adenosine triphosphate, all using chemical metabolism. Whereas plants, if you go to the plants, they're going to just use sunlight. And the sunlight, as I said before, in the process of photons, will help jumpstart that energy. All right. And one thing you'll notice is because there are bacteria that go through photosynthesis. There are bacteria that are heterotrophs, photoheterotrophs, and there are bacteria that are also here, besides animals, that are chemoheterotrophs. Fungi is also listed over here. And also these photoheterotrophs put yeast, and some molds. They're part of that. Now, we can even break this down further because the next phase in the next video, we have to talk about electrons, how electrons will jumpstart this energy reaction. So that's in the next lesson. So again, just to review, we have autotrophs that are self-feeding, heterotrophs, that is, which consume others, and you can break them down even further. If they're using light as their metabolism, then they're there's one underlined autotrophs. And if they're using chemical reactions, then there'd be a chemo. So if you're a chemoautotroph, for example, you're not consuming organisms. You're getting yourself feeding, but you're using chemical reactions instead of light to produce that energy. Whereas in the heterotrophs, like yeast and molds, you'll consume other organisms, but you'll use light to help break that into energy. Whereas us, we consume others and we use chemical reactions within our body to make ATP, that adenosine triphosphate. All right, so again, next video we have to talk about electrons.